Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's broadcast will begin in 5 minutes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first broadcast in Peculiar Productions' spooky season. Tonight's tale concerns an alchemist with supposed paranormal powers and a grudge to bear, and the race against time to save an unsuspecting academic's life from these dark forces. This is Casting the Runes.
April 15th. Dear Mr. Carswell, I am requested by the Council of the Burnstow Association to return your draft of a paper on the truth of alchemy, which you have been good enough to offer to read at our forthcoming meeting. I regret to inform you that the Council do not see their way to including it in the programme. Yours faithfully, Charles Gayton, Secretary. April 18th. Dear Sir, I am sorry to say that my engagements do not permit me affording you an interview on the subject of your proposed paper. nor do our laws allow your discussing the matter with our council committee as you suggest. Allow me to assure you that the fullest consideration was given to the draft which you submitted, and that it was not declined without having been referred to the judgment of a most competent authority. It can hardly be necessary for me to add that no personal question can have had the slightest influence on the Council's decision. April 20th. The Secretary of the Burnstow Association respectfully informs Mr. Carswell that it is impossible for him to communicate the name of any person or persons to whom the draft of his paper may have been submitted. He also wishes it to be known that he cannot reply further to any letters on this subject.
Who is Mr. Carswell?
Why, my dear, at present Mr. Carswell is a very angry man, but I don't know much about him otherwise, except that he is a person of wealth. His address is Lufford Abbey, Warwickshire, and he's an alchemist apparently, and wants to tell us all about it. That's about all, except that I don't want to meet him for the next week or two. Now, if you're ready to leave, I am. We shouldn't keep the Bennets waiting.
What have you been doing to make him angry?
The usual thing, my dear. He sent in a draft of a paper he wanted to read at the next meeting, so we referred it to Edward Dunning, almost the only man in England who knows about these things, and he said it was perfectly hopeless. So we declined it. So Carswell has been pelting me with letters ever since. The last thing he wanted was the name of the man we referred his nonsense to. You saw my answer to that.
I should think not, indeed. I do hope, though, he won't get to know it was poor Mr. Dunning.
Poor Mr. Dunning? I don't know why you call him that. He's a very happy man, is Dunning. Lots of hobbies and a comfortable home, and all his time to himself.
I only meant I should be sorry for him if this man got hold of his name and came and bothered him.
Oh, yes, I dare say he would be poor Mr. Dunning then.
Indeed. Margaret Bennet's from Warwickshire, isn't she?
I don't recall, my dear.
I'm sure she is. Grandfather was mayor of Nuneaton at one point, if I remember right. I dare say she may know more about this Mr. Carswell. I may ask
Florence!
her if...
Don't you go asking intrusive questions, charging in like a bull in a china shop.
Oh, Charles, really. It'll be done judiciously, discreetly. You know me.
I saw the Abbot of Lufford this morning.
Did you? What in the world brings him up to town?
Goodness knows. He was coming out of the British Museum gate as I drove past.
A real abbot?
Oh, no, my dear. Only a neighbour of ours in the country who bought Lufford Abbey a few years ago. His real name is Carswell.
Is he a friend of yours?
A friend? Hardly. There really is nothing to be said for Mr. Carswell. Nobody knows what he does with himself. His servants are a horrible set of people. He has invented a new religion for himself and practices all sorts of appalling rites. He is very easily offended and never forgives anybody. He has a dreadful face. It's really
I wouldn't say dreadful, my dear, just a bit...
A dreadful face indeed. He never does a kind action, and whatever influence he does exert is mischievous.
Do the poor man justice, dear. You forgot the treat he gave the school children.
Forget it indeed, but I am glad you mentioned it because it gives an idea of the man. Now, Florence, listen to this. The first winter he was at Lufford, this delightful neighbour of ours wrote to the clergyman of his parish. He's not ours, but we know him very well, and offered to show the school children some magic lantern slides. He said he had some new kinds which he thought would interest them. Well, the clergyman was rather surprised because Mr. Carswell had shown himself inclined to be unpleasant to the children, complaining of their trespassing or something of the sort. But of course he accepted, and the evening was fixed.
and our friend went himself to see that everything went right. He said he had never been so thankful for anything as that his own children were all prevented from being there. They were at a children's party at our house, as a matter of fact, because this Mr. Carswell had evidently set out with the intention of frightening these poor village children out of their wits, and I do believe if he had been allowed to go on, he would actually have done so. He began with some comparatively mild things. Red Riding Hood was one, and even then Mr. Farrar said the wolf was so dreadful that several of the smaller children had to be taken out. And he said Mr. Carswell began the story by producing a noise like a wolf howling in the distance, which was the most gruesome thing he had ever heard. All the slides he showed, Mr. Farrar said, were most clever. They were absolutely realistic, and where he had got them or how he had worked them could not imagine. Well, the show went on, and the stories kept on becoming a little more terrifying each time, and the children were mesmerised into complete silence. At last he produced a series which represented a little boy passing through Lufford Abbey in the evening. Every child in the room could recognise the place from the pictures, and this poor boy was followed and at last pursued and overtaken and either torn to pieces or somehow made away with by a horrible hopping creature in white, which you first saw dodging about among the trees, and gradually it appeared more and more plainly. Mr. Farrar said it gave him one of the worst nightmares he ever remembered, and what it must have meant to the children doesn't bear thinking of. Of course, this was too much, and he spoke very sharply indeed to Mr. Carswell, and said it couldn't go on, and all he said was,
"Oh, you think it's time to bring our little show to an end, and send them home to their beds? Very well."
And then, if you please, he switched on another slide, which showed a great mass of snakes, centipedes, and disgusting creatures with wings, and somehow or other he made it seem as if they were climbing out of the picture and getting in amongst the audience. This was accompanied by a sort of dry rustling noise, which sent the children nearly mad, and of course they stampeded. A good many of them were rather hurt in getting out of the room, and I don't suppose one of them closed an eye that night. There was the most dreadful trouble in the village afterwards. Of course, the mothers threw a good part of the blame on poor Mr. Farrar, and if they could have got past the gates, I believe the fathers would have broken every window in the abbey. Well now, that's Mr. Carswell. That's the Abbot of Lufford, my dear, and you can imagine how we covet his society.
Yes, he has all the possibilities of a distinguished criminal, has Carswell. I should be sorry for anyone who got into his bad books.
Is he the man, or am I mixing him up with someone else? Is he the man who brought out a history of witchcraft some time back? 10 years or more?
That's him. Do you remember the reviews of it?
Certainly I do. What's equally to the point, I knew the author of the most incisive of the lot. So did you. You must remember John Harrington. He was at Cambridge in our time.
Oh, very well indeed. Though I don't think I saw or heard anything of him between the time I left and the day I read the account of his inquest.
The inquest?
What has happened to him?
Why, he fell out of a tree and broke his neck. But the puzzle was, what could have induced him to get up there? It was a mysterious business, I must say. Here was this man, not an athletic fellow was he, with no eccentric twist about him that was ever noticed, well known and liked in the place, walking home along a country road late in the evening, and suddenly begins to run like mad, loses his hat and stick, and finally shins up a tree. Quite a difficult tree growing in the hedgerow. A dead branch gives way, he comes down with it and breaks his neck. And there he's found the next morning with the most dreadful face of fear on him. It was pretty evident, of course, that he'd been chased by something, and people talked of savage dogs and beasts escaped out of the menageries. But there was nothing to be made of that. That was in '89. I believe his sister's been trying to get an explanation ever since. She, of course, insists that there was malice in it, but I don't know. It's difficult to see how it could have come in.
Would anyone like some more tea?
Oh, yes, please, Margaret. That would be lovely. Shall I give you a hand?
So, Charles, did you ever look into Carswell's History of Witchcraft?
Yes, I did. I went so far as to read it.
Was it as bad as it was made out to be?
Oh, in point of style and form, quite hopeless. It deserved all the pulverizing it got, but besides that, it was an evil book. The man believed every word of what he was saying.
Well, I only remember Harrington's review of it, and I must say, if I'd have been the author, it would have quenched my literary ambition for good. I should never have held up my head again.
It hasn't had that effect in the present case.
I do hope that horrible man won't find out that Mr. Dunning had anything to do with the rejection of his paper.
I don't think there's much chance of that. Dunning won't mention it himself. These matters are confidential, and none of us will for the same reason. Carswell won't know his name, for Dunning hasn't published anything on the same subject yet. The only danger is that Carswell might find out if he was to ask the British Museum people who consulted their alchemical manuscripts.
Let's hope it won't occur to him.
Can I help you, sir?
Yes, I'm certain you can. Are there any people who consult your manuscripts on alchemy?
Final stop, sir.
I beg your pardon, George. I was looking at that advert. It's a very odd one, isn't it? I mean, blue letters on a yellow background.
It isn't that, sir. In memory of John Harrington, FSA of the Laurels, Ashbrook, Warwickshire. Died September 18th, 1889. 3 months were allowed. Well, my word. I never did see one like that before. Well, it's a cure, ain't it? Something up to their jokes here, I should think. Yeah, we'll soon have this right. No, there ain't no transfer. Seems to me as if it was regular in the glass. What I mean is in the substance, as you may say. Don't you think so, sir?
Who looks after these adverts and gives leave for them to be put up? Could you inquire about it? I'll just make a note of the words.
Look alive, George. Time's up.
All right. There's something I want to sort up at this end. You come and have a look at this here glass.
Oh, what's going on with the glass? Well, and who's Harrington? What's this all about?
I was just asking who was responsible for putting up the adverts in your cars, and saying that it would be as well to make some inquiry about this one.
Well, sir, that's all done in the company's office, that work is. It's our Mr. Timms, I believe. He looks into that.
When we put up tonight, I'll leave word, and perhaps you'll be able to tell tomorrow if you happen to come in this way.
I'd be much obliged. Thank you, gentlemen.
Begging your pardon, sir, but there's someone to see you.
At this hour, Rose? Who is it?
2 men from the tramways, sir. They're most anxious to speak to you.
It must be about that advert. I'd nearly forgotten about that. The tram was so busy this morning I couldn't speak to the conductor. Please, show them in.
Yes, sir.
Ah, gentlemen. Please come in. Would you like some refreshment?
No, thank you, sir.
Very well. That will be all, Rose. Thank you.
Sir.
So, gentlemen, What did Mr. Timms have to say about the advert? I did see that it'd been made away with.
Well, sir, that's what we took the liberty to step round about. Mr. Timms gave William here the rough side of his tongue about that. According to him, there weren't no advertisement of that description sent in, nor ordered, nor paid for, nor put up, nor nothing, let alone not being there, and we was playing the fool taking up his time. Well, I says, if that's the case, all I ask of you, Mr. Timms, is to take a look at it for yourself, I says. Of course, if it ain't there, you may call me what you like. Right, he says, I will, and we went straight off. Now, I leave it to you, sir. If that ad with Harrington on it weren't as plain as you ever saw anything, blue letters on yellow glass, as you says at the time, which you bore me out regular in the glass, because if you remember, you recollect me swabbing at it with me duster.
To be sure I do, quite clearly. Well?
You may say, well, Mr. Timms gets in the car with a light and...
No, he told me to hold the light outside.
Now, where's your precious ad, he says, I've heard so much about. Here it is, Mr. Timms, I says. I laid me hand on it.
Well, it was gone, I suppose? Broken?
Broke? Not it. There weren't no more trace of them letters, blue letters they was, on that piece of glass, and... Well, it's no good me talking. I never did see such a thing. I leave it to William here but as if he says, what's the benefit of me going on about it?
And what did Mr. Timms say?
Well, he did what I give him leave to. He called us pretty much anything he liked. I don't know as I blame him much either. But what we thought was, William and me, well, as soon as we saw you take down a bit of a note about that, well, lettering...
I certainly did, and I have it now. Do you wish me to speak to Mr. Timms myself and show it to him?
There, didn't I say as much? Deal with a gentleman, if you can ever get the track of one, that's my word. Now, George, you'll allow as I ain't took you very far wrong tonight.
Very well, William, very well. No need to go on about it. You had a frog march me here. I come quiet, didn't I? All the same for that, we hadn't ought to take up much of your time this way, sir. But if it happened that you could find time to step around the company office and tell Mr. Timms what you've seen for yourself, we should lay under very high obligation to you for the trouble.
Yeah, you see, it ain't being called one thing and another as we mind. But if they got into their head in the office, as we seen things that weren't there, well, you know, one thing leads to another, and where would be 12-month hence? Well, you can understand what I mean.
Of course. I'll speak to Mr. Timms tomorrow. I'm sure that any blot against your names will soon be remedied, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir. Much obliged to you.
The volumes you requested, Mr. Dunning.
Thank you.
Dunning.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
May I give you this? I think it should be yours.
It is mine. Thank you.
Are you finished for the day, Mr. Dunning?
Yes. Earlier on, there was a gentleman in the manuscript room with me. A stout fellow. Do you happen to know who he is?
Oh, that's Mr. Carswell. He was asking me a week ago about who were the great authorities on alchemy, and of course, I told him you were the only one in the country. I'll see if I can catch him. He'd like to meet you, I'm sure.
For heaven's sake, don't dream of it.
Oh, very well. He doesn't come here often. I dare say you won't meet him.
Dr. Wilson, is everything all right?
I've had to upset your household arrangements, I'm sorry to say, Dunning. Both your servants out of action. In fact, I've had to send them to the hospice.
Good heavens, what's the matter?
It's something like bacterial poisoning, I should think. You've not suffered yourself, I can see, or you wouldn't be walking around. I think they'll pull through, all right?
Oh, dear. Have you any idea what brought it on?
Well, they tell me they brought some shellfish from a hawker for their dinner. It's odd. I've made inquiries, but I can't find any hawker that's been to the other houses in the street. I couldn't send word to you. They won't be back for a bit yet. You come and dine with me tonight, anyhow, and we can make arrangements for going on. 8 o'clock?
Edward! Edward! My dear fellow, how are you? Come, sit. You look somewhat amiss, old chap. Whatever's happened?
Passed a rather unpleasant night, truth be told, Charles. My maid and housekeeper had taken sick, so I was alone last night. Near midnight, I heard my study door opening. Now I most definitely shut it after I put my papers away last night. I heard no other step following it. So I slipped out, looked over the banister. No light, no sound. Just a gust of hot air, which played for an instant around my shins. Frightened somewhat, I locked myself up in my room. The electric light would not come on. And when I reached under my pillow, well, there was something inhuman beneath it.
Inhuman?
It felt like a thing with a mouth and teeth and hair all about it, but not a human mouth. I locked myself in the spare room and spent the rest of the miserable night waiting for the door to open. It didn't, thankfully. After I let the cleaning woman in this morning, I searched the house. Nothing untoward anywhere.
My poor dear man, what an upset. Look here, we're alone at home. Absolutely, you must put up with us.
No, I can't.
Yes, no excuse. Send your things in this afternoon.
It's most kind of you, Charles. I believe that alchemist man knows that it was I that got his paper rejected.
What makes you think that?
The assistant at the museum told me that Carswell had asked after any experts on alchemy, and my name was mentioned.
Well, in that case, old chap, I'd say your guess was correct.
Not that I care much, only it might be a nuisance if we were to meet. He's a bad-tempered party, I imagine.
Maybe.
Look, Charles, do you know anything about a man named John Harrington?
Harrington?
Yes. There was an advert on the tram announcing his passing, which mysteriously disappeared. I even had a leaflet handed to me in the street bearing Harrington's name, which soon got knocked out of my hand and lost when some oaf barged into me. The name's following me. Did you know him at all?
Well, yes. We were at Cambridge together. Didn't know him very well. Acquaintances more than friends, I'd say. I believe he died quite suddenly some years ago. 1889, I think. Very good writer, Harrington. Rationalist, you know. He has a sister, Henrietta, who survived him. We knew each other somewhat. If you like, I can arrange for the two of you to meet.
And that's why Mr. Gayton suggested I speak to you, Miss Harrington.
Henrietta, please.
Henrietta. I'm sorry to ask, to dredge this up, but could you recall any of the circumstances connected with your brother's death?
Oh, goodness. Well, John was in a very odd state, undeniably, during some weeks before the catastrophe, though not immediately before. There were several things. The principal notion he had was that he thought he was being followed. He had never had such fancies as this before. I cannot get it out of my mind that there was ill will at work. And what you tell me about yourself reminds me very much of my brother. Can you think of any possible link?
There is one that's been taking shape vaguely in my mind. I've been told that your brother reviewed a book very severely not long before he died. Just lately, I happened to cross the path of the man who wrote that book in a way that he would resent.
Was the man's name Carswell?
Exactly that.
From something he said, I feel sure that my brother was beginning to believe, very much against his will, that Carswell was at the bottom of his trouble. I want to tell you what seems to me to have a bearing on the situation. My brother was a great musician and used to run up to concerts in town. He came back 3 months before he died from one of these and gave me his program to look at. He always kept them.
I nearly missed this one. I suppose I must have dropped it. Anyhow, I was looking for it under my seat and in my pockets and so on, and my neighbour offered me his and said,
I might give it you. I have no further use for it.
And he went away just afterwards. I don't know who he was. A stout, clean-shaven man. I should have been sorry to miss it. Of course, I could have just bought another, but this cost me nothing.
At another time, he told me that he'd been very uncomfortable both on the way to his hotel and during the night. Then, not very long after, he was going over these programs, putting them in order to have them bound up. And in this particular one, he found quite near the beginning a strip of paper with some very odd writing on it in red and black. Most carefully done. It looked to me more like runic letters than anything else.
Why, this must belong to that stout fellow. It looks as if it might be worth returning to him. It may be a copy of something. Evidently someone has taken some trouble over it. How can I find his address?
We talked it over for a little and agreed that it wasn't worth advertising about, and that my brother had better look out for the man at the next concert, to which he was going very soon. The paper was lying on the book, and we were both by the fire. It was a cold, windy summer evening. I suppose the door blew open, though I didn't notice it. At any rate, a warm gust came quite suddenly between us, took the paper and blew it straight into the fire. It was light, thin paper and flared and went up the chimney in a single ash. Well, I said, you can't give it back now. He said nothing for a minute, then said,
No, I can't, but why you should keep on saying so, I don't know.
John, I didn't say that more than once.
No more than 4 times, you mean?
I remember all that very clearly. And now to come to the point. I don't know if you looked at that book of Carswell's which my unfortunate brother reviewed. It's not likely that you should, but I did, both before his death and after it. The first time we made game of it together. It was written in no style at all, split infinitives and every sort of thing that makes an Oxford gorge rise. Then there was nothing that the man didn't swallow, mixing up classical myths and stories out of the Golden Legend with reports of savage customs of today. All very proper, no doubt, if you know how to use them, but he didn't. He seemed to put the Golden Legend and the Golden Bough exactly on a par, and to believe both. A pitiable exhibition, in short. Well, after the misfortune, I looked over the book again. It was no better than before, but the impression which it left this time on my mind was different. I suspected that Carswell had borne ill will to my brother, even that he was in some way responsible for what had happened. And now his book seemed a very sinister performance indeed. One chapter in particular struck me, in which he spoke of casting the runes on people, either for the purpose of gaining their affection or of getting them out of the way, perhaps more the latter. He spoke of all this in a way that really seemed to imply actual knowledge. The upshot is that I am pretty sure from information received that the man at the concert was Carswell. I more than suspect, that the paper was of importance, and I do believe that if my brother had been able to give it back, he might have been alive now. Therefore, it occurs to me to ask whether you have anything to put beside what I've told you.
Yes. At the British Museum, I knocked a pile of books over. Carswell handed one back to me.
Then he did hand you some papers. Have you examined them?
No.
We must look at them at once and very carefully.
Here. This is my portfolio of papers.
Ah, wait! Here. This strip of paper just fell out. Ah, I thought so. It might be the identical thing that was given to my brother. You'll have to look out, Edward. This may mean something quite serious for you.
Well, these characters are certainly runes. I cannot decipher them.
Nor I. Should we transcribe them?
I'd hesitate to copy them. without knowing whether it will perpetuate whatever evil purpose they might conceal.
This is true. So we cannot ascertain what is conveyed in this curious message.
Although it seems obvious that it brings its possessors into very undesirable company.
Absolutely. Then perhaps it should be returned to the source whence it came.
I'd say that the only safe way of doing that is by way of personal service. And here contrivance might be necessary. Carswell knows me by sight. But then, might not the blow fall first?
Perhaps we can time it. John attended the concert on June 18th. That's when Carswell put his black spot on him. He died on September 18th.
3 months were allowed. It was on the inscription in the tram window. Perhaps mine may be at 3 months too. I believe I can fix it by my diary. Yes. April 23rd was the day at the museum, and that brings us to July 23rd. It's extremely important to me to know anything you can tell me about the progress of your brother's trouble.
Of course. Well, the sense of being watched whenever he was alone was the most distressing thing to him. After a time, I took to sleeping in his room, and he was the better for that. Still, he talked a great deal in his sleep. I can tell you this. 2 things came for him by post during those weeks, both with a London postmark, both addressed in a commercial hand. One was a woodcut, roughly torn out of the page, one which shows a moonlit road and a man walking along it, followed by an awful demon. Under it were written some lines out of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Like one that on a lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread, and having a once turned round walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread.
And the other item?
A calendar. My brother paid no attention to this, but I looked at it after his death, and found that everything after September 18th had been torn out. You may be surprised at his having gone out alone the evening he was killed, but during the last 10 days or so of his life, he had been quite free from the sense of being followed.
So, what now?
Well, I know some neighbours of Carswell's, and the good lady of the house knows all of the comings and goings of the village. That's a way we can keep a watch on Carswell's movements. I will telegram regularly to let you know his whereabouts.
And what shall I do?
You need to be in readiness to try and cross Carswell's path at any moment. Keep this paper safe and in a place of ready access. With luck, we can stop this.
Telegram, May 29th. Carswell remains immovable at Lufford. H.
Telegram, June 12th. Carswell remains at Lufford. H.
Telegram, July 5th. Still immovable. H.
Telegram, July 17th. Leaves Victoria by boat train Thursday night. Do not miss. I come to you tonight. H. So, the train leaves Victoria at 9, and its last stop before Dover is Croydon West. I'll mark down Carswell at Victoria and look out for you at Croydon. You need to be disguised as far as might be, and have no labels or initials on any of your luggage, and you must at all costs have the paper with you. Once aboard, you make the desired transfer.
How?
I don't know. Put it in his coat pocket. Slip it into one of his bags. Whatever chance you get to offload the wretched paper, you must take it. But you must do it without him suspecting or seeing. If he catches you, well, there's no telling what he'll do.
Damned waiting. Excuse me, what time is the boat train to Dover due?
Less than 5 minutes now, sir. 3 minutes sooner from when you asked me the last time.
Thank you. Sorry to bother you again. Henrietta could have been mistaken. Oh, maybe she's not even travelling now. Maybe he's got an earlier train. If he eludes me now...
Boat train to Dover!
And Henrietta's on board too. I can see her sat by the window in the third carriage. Carswell's also on board.
Boat train to Dover at platform 2.
I best get on. Thank you. Excuse me, madam. Is this seat taken?
It is, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Excuse me, sir. Is anyone sat opposite you?
No, be my guest.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dover is the next and final stop. Next and final stop, Dover!
Excuse me, I just need to...
Oh, of course. Be my guest.
He's dropped his ticket case. Now's your chance, Edward.
Here it is. The perfect place to put the paper. Excuse me, may I give you this, sir? I believe it's yours.
Yes, it is. Much obliged to you, sir. Would you mind if I open the window? It's grown quite warm in here.
Of course.
Oh, miss, I could have sworn.
Don't worry, sir. We'll find it. Don't worry.
Well, there we have it.
Congratulations, Edward. Oh, here, sit down on the bench. I'll go and see that Carswell gets on the ferry.
You, sir, beg pardon. Did the other gentleman show his ticket?
What the devil do you mean, the other gentleman?
The devil? Well, I don't know, I'm sure. My mistake, sir, must have been your rugs, ask your pardon. Hey, had he got a dog with him or what? Funny thing, I could have swore he wasn't alone.
Well, whatever it was, they have to see to it on the ferry.
Aye, she's off now. Another week and we should be getting the holiday customers.
You seem pensive.
It's just... Well, are we justified in sending that man to his death?
We don't know that we have.
But we believe we have done so. Should we not warn him at least?
No. If he is the murderer I think he is, we have done no more than is just. Still, if you think it better... But how and where can you warn him?
He was booked to Abbeville only. I saw that. If I wired to the hotels there in Joanne's guide, Carswell, examine your ticket case, I should feel happier.
Well, this is the 21st. He will have a day.
But I am afraid he's gone into the dark. Nevertheless, I'll leave telegrams at the hotel office before we depart. Come in.
I've brought you the newspaper, sir.
Thank you, Rose. I'm so glad you've recovered from your illness.
Thank you, sir. Me too, sir. Odd business it was. But both myself and Mrs. Hodge are back on our feet. I won't be buying any shellfish from any hawkers again, though. And that's for sure.
Very wise. Can you ask Mrs. Hodge to have lunch ready at 1 o'clock, please?
Yes, sir.
Now, let's see. Minor royal scandal. Worrying developments in America. Nothing new there. Oh. On the afternoon of July 23rd, an English traveller was examining the front of St. Wolfran's Church in Abbeville then under extensive repair, and was struck on the head and instantly killed by a stone falling from the scaffold erected round the northwestern tower. As was clearly proved, there was no workman on the scaffold at that moment. The travellers' papers identified him as Manfred Carswell.
And so concludes our tale and tonight's broadcast. Thank you for joining us. Are such things real? Who knows? But one could do worse than remember this piece of advice from Hamlet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.